Random Thoughts and Observations. The House That Built Me.
Hello, I'm David E. McClendon Sr., and today I'm going to tell you about the house that built me. Rather than the house I built, the house that built me. Now this was inspired, if you look on the actual post that goes along with this, uh, by a prompt from a web or blog known as Mama Cats, and you'll see the link on the blog somewhere. Anyway, I'm not going to try to make this a professional post. I'm going to try to make it a story straight to the heart. And this is directed primarily at my nieces and nephews who I've most likely never spoken to, because I'm telling them about a house where they lived. Years ago, back in 1974, my family moved to Ivy, South Carolina. Now, the way this all took place was my father was the branch manager for National Cash Register in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And along about 1973, National Cash Register changed the way that they paid their sales representatives. Before they paid them on straight commission with a draw, and they decided that they were going to pay them salary with no commission. Now, my father was making approximately $60,000 a year on sales, and back then that would buy you a very good house. That would be roughly equivalent to about $300,000 to $500,000 in today's money, depending upon what rates of inflation you use. Okay, so he went from $60,000 a year to $20,000 a year, and he realized he couldn't continue to survive on that salary. And so he started looking into different franchises, and the franchise he decided upon was Western Auto. My family, my mother and father, and my sister Sandra, my brother Daniel, and I began to travel around the state of South Carolina looking at different towns that Western Auto felt like were good places to potentially build a Western Auto store. And we looked at McCall, South Carolina, and McCormick, South Carolina, as well as Ivy, South Carolina, and we decided that, my father and mother decided that Ivy, South Carolina was the way to go. So it was determined that we'd move to Ivy, South Carolina. My father went to Ivy and started looking around to try to find land on which to build a store. Well, first of all, he started to find a building that he could rent, and no one would rent him anything. The town was kind of sewed up by some different people that just didn't want new stores coming in. And so every time he tried to buy land, one particular gentleman would get there and buy an option on the property so that he'd have to buy it through him and pay a whole lot more money. Anyway, my father wandered upon this one lady. He saw this piece of land, and he knocked on the house next door to the land and asked who owned the property, and this lady's name was Mrs. Willingham. Anyway, I'll get more of a story on that in another post, but he bought the land beside Mrs. Willingham's house, and that's where the store was built. Well, now we needed a place to stay, and we traveled all over Ivy and all over parts of Anderson looking for a place to buy for a house or to live. Well, we couldn't find anything. There really wasn't anything available. And he'd asked several people around town, about finding a house. And we pulled up to Cliff's restaurant, which at that point in time was probably called Cliff's Refreshment Bar. And he said to the guy that owned the place, his name was Smiley Powell. He said, "Hey, you find me a house?" And the guy said, "Yeah, I did." And he pointed down the road a little ways to this house in the corner. It was a white house, 2-story. And he said, "That house is for sale, but there's no for sale sign up." And so Smiley called the realtor, and we went to parked in front of the house while we waited for the real estate agent to arrive. Well, when the real estate agent arrived, we went through the one side of the house, which if you're facing the house from the front, you're facing the house, there's a door that's right dead center of the front of the house, or close to dead center. And over to your left is a another door, which enters into what was a small sitting room. So we're going to take a little tour going that way. Well, to begin with, at that point in time, the front porch was partitioned off by this lattice work. The main part of the front porch and then the part that went into that door. And what this was the caretaker's apartment, the people that were living there. And the funny thing about it is the caretaker didn't want to have to move. And so every time the real estate agent put up a sign, he'd take the sign down and throw it in the yard. Now picture, if you will, you're looking at this house from the front, and there is a bamboo forest, and I mean literally a bamboo forest, over as you're facing the house over to your right hand side. Just bamboo everywhere. Trees, but primarily bamboo, and you couldn't walk through it. It was that thick. You couldn't see anything. There was a house in the backyard that later had to be moved, but you couldn't even see it from the front yard. Anyway, so making a short story long, let's go and take a tour of the house. Now, as you entered into the room that I told you about, that was what the family had as their living room. The caretaker's family had as their living room, and later we turned that into my mother's parlor or office. As you walked from that room into the next room, that was their kitchen, which later became my mom's dressing room, where she had her dresser and a few odds and ends and one of those machines that, you know, shakes you to try to get rid of fat, and I don't know that it ever did any good for anybody. Anyway, if you turn to the right going out of that room, you'd walk into what was the family's bedroom, and that's what became my parents' bedroom, the master bedroom. And just off the bedroom, right beside the door that came in from the what had been the family's kitchen but was now the dressing room, right beside that door was the door to the bathroom, and it had one of those old clawfoot kind of bathtubs. Terrible shape. I mean, it was covered in rust. It was just nasty. It was terrible. Anyway, going back into the bedroom, crossing the bedroom from where the kitchen had been, you go through a door, and that was a foyer, or a little hall, or whatever you want to call it. And directly to your left was what we called the pink bathroom. It was a 3/4 bath. It had a shower. And this terribly, terribly nasty sink. The sink had this terrible rust stains in it, and I'll get to that in a little while. Terrible rust stains, and pink, honest to goodness, terrible pink tile. Couldn't find it today if you wanted to, not that you would. But this pink tile. Going straight across from the foyer into the next room, that's what we turned into the den, but at that point in time was just an empty room. And if you turn to the right, what had been, there was a closet under the stairs. It was a storage closet. But then directly beside that was what had been a front porch that was closed in, and we turned that into a library. But for a while, that was the only real den we had in the house. The only real place to sit in the house was that room. And it had these casement windows, and casement windows the kind you crank out like an old trailer window. Anyway. And just off of that were two French doors, double French doors, that would open up onto what was a screen porch, and the screen was just in terrible shape. Okay, going back into the room that I told you had become the den, going back through what was the library, back into the den. Just off of that was the kitchen. Now when you go into this kitchen while we're viewing this house, the kitchen sags like this, the floor sags like this. There's these old metal cabinets that are kind of folded in, and there's also this old sink that's kind of just barely sitting there. And just outside, you've got the kitchen. You've walked in from the den to the kitchen. To your left is a door out into what we call the back porch, and at that point in time it was kind of open air with some kind of rails. And then there was off the back porch is what we call the back porch, but at that point in time it was like a screened in porch over an old well. So it had been like a well house. Anyway, and then off of that, part of that was this part of the that what we call the back porch was just falling off. Well, eventually we closed in that what we call the back porch. We closed that in to make a storage room, but it had been like a screened room. Okay, so let's go back into the house, back into the kitchen, back into the den, back into the foyer. And while you're in the foyer, If you'll turn to your left as you're coming out of the den, you'll see these two double doors, double French doors. And they were in kind of sad shape at the time. Go through those doors, and over on your right was what became my brother's bedroom, but we had intended to be the living room, and it was a setting area for the people. Now, I didn't tell you before, but what this house had been was, for a long time, had been a boarding house for old maid school teachers. See, originally, this house was built by a gentleman named Preston Brooks Gailey. He was named after a South Carolina patriot, statesman, congressman he was named after a congressman from South Carolina back pre-Civil War. And there's a good story about that, and we'll tell you in another video about the story about Preston Brooks. But Preston Brooks Gailey was named after him, and Preston Brooks Gailey was a rich cotton merchant. And for all intents and purposes, this house was a mansion, and everybody in town knew this as the Gailey place. You'd say, where do you live? I live in the Gailey place. And everybody knew exactly where it was. Well, anyway, so Mr. Gailey lived there with his family, and then after he died, the house fell in kind of disrepair and became a boarding house. And that's where all the old maid school teachers lived. There'd been all kind of people that had boarded there. Anyway, if you'll picture at this point in time, the house smells. It smells of this chemical. It's a powder that they spread out to kill fleas on dogs and large animals. It's called bee brand, and it stank of this. The lighting in the house was these bare wires that hung down to bare bulbs, and if you wanted to plug in anything, you plugged it into the base of that bulb. So you're ironing, you reach up, you plug it in, you get done, you unplug it, and the bulb swings all over the place. Anyway, so this house, like I said, had been in disrepair, and that's important because when we go upstairs. Okay, now the walls, now, or at least last time I was there, the walls were sheetrock, and a lot of places there was wallpaper on the sheetrock. But at this point in time, there's what they call lath and beadboard, and that's what's showing. Lath and beadboard in layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of wallpaper. They'd put up a layer of wallpaper, then they'd paint it and paint it, paint it, paint it, paint it for years. Every year they'd paint it. Okay, then they put up another layer of wallpaper. They went and ripped the old wallpaper off. They put up another layer of wallpaper, and then the next time they wanted to do something, they paint it and paint it, paint it. And, so they ended up being like 16, 17 layers of wallpaper with all kind of layers of paint in between these layers of wallpaper. Okay, now we're going to go upstairs. Upstairs is where all the boarders live, or most of the boarders live. Okay, so up the stairs. As you walk up the stairs, when you get to the top of the stairs, there's a sort of a turn to the left. Okay, if you take that turn to the left and then you face back to your right, over in your right is what we ended up calling the yellow bedroom. That had started out to be my brother's bedroom, but he was too afraid to sleep upstairs. Scared to death, wouldn't go upstairs. Very, very rarely would you ever see him upstairs. That had been his room. Originally it was painted yellow by our family, had this pretty yellow carpet in it. And he had some wallpaper that had street signs like yield sign, stop sign, one way, do not enter, that kind of thing. And we bought, when we had the house rewired, we had these light fixtures that looked like a red, white, and blue basketball going through a ball hoop, a basketball hoop. Anyway, so that was supposed to be his bedroom, but he only slept there 2 or 3 nights, and they moved him downstairs because he was scared to death to stay upstairs, and that's important. Okay, when we first go upstairs, you see 5-gallon buckets all around. Now these 5-gallon buckets aren't just 5-gallon buckets, these are slop jars. Now, if you don't know, a slop jar is a toilet, more or less, that you relieve yourself in, and then you take outside and you dump. Well, the reason that they had these was because there was, the upstairs bathroom no longer existed. There was a toilet on a pipe and no floor. So you walk into this bathroom, okay, you walk out of the yellow bedroom. If you've been in the yellow bedroom, you come out of the yellow bedroom, over on your right is where the bathroom's supposed to be. Now there's this huge window back behind the toilet, but there is no place to sit, to you can't get to the toilet unless you jump or something. No floor. There's beams you could walk on the beam. And if you did sit on the toilet, then, you know, everybody outside would see you. Eventually, we closed that window in somewhat to where it's a smaller window. Okay, so we come back out into the, what we call the upstairs landing. Okay, and just to the right of the bathroom, if you come out of the bathroom on the right, is what was my room. Okay, and that, when we had it, when we first started, my mom sanded down all the floors and painted them, and then eventually it was so cold in the wintertime. It was just so cold in the wintertime. All this old hardwood would get cold, and you freeze to death. You freeze your feet, you get out of the bed, and you go, oh. Well, they carpeted it after, you know, the first year. And in my bedroom was the same color carpet as all the other main floor carpeting, this light blue that showed dirt really terribly. Okay, on my walls we had this was the bicentennial year, by the way, leading up to the bicentennial, 1974. So leading up to the bicentennial, and we had some Revolutionary War wallpaper in that same kind of light fixture like I described in my brother's room. And the baseboards, the wainscoting, were sort of a gold color. Alright. Anyway, you go out of my bedroom, turn to the right, and you go up to the next room, and that was my sister's room. It had this sort of light green carpet. It was a pretty green. And in my sister's room, she had what seemed like thousands of dolls. There's all these little eyeballs watching you all the time. Many dolls in this room. And legend had it, rumor had it, that in the closet in that room that someone had hung themselves. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but there were wires in there that could have possibly been used for that purpose. But that was the only closet in the whole house that didn't have a ceiling to it. So you go in, you look up, and you can see up into the attic of the house. It wasn't really a finished attic, it was just like a crawl space or whatever up there. And then this other room upstairs, if you come out of my sister's room, turn to the right, that's the upstairs den. Now, after touring this house, my parents say, yeah, we'll take it. We go outside, and as soon as my sister learns that we're going to take this house, she begins to cry, uncontrollably, crying, just terribly crying. And my father's writing the check to buy the house. $12,000. The house itself cost $12,000. Wrote it out on the back of the 1967 Cadillac that my mother had. And that was the purchase of the house, while my sister cried and cried and cried. And like I said, this house was terribly run down. Anyway, so we're getting ready to build the Western Auto Store, and there were a lot of delays. And so the store, they weren't able to break ground when they wanted to, when they had intended to, which would have been long about the end of the school year in Spartanburg. Well, right after the end of the school year, things started arriving. Several completely full transfer trucks of fixtures, and when I say fixtures, I mean shelves and the different kind of things that you have in a store, displays and that sort of thing, began to arrive, and a truck driver would call from the town of Iowa to our house in Inman, South Carolina, 410 Wedgwood Drive, Inman, South Carolina. And they say, hey, we got this load of stuff, and we got to put it somewhere. And so my mother, my brother, my sister, and I would ride down to Iowa, and my sister, my brother, my sister, my mother, and I would unload the truck, and my brother, who was about 6 years old, would stand there and get in the way. And we unloaded that truck like all get out. And we had, the first thing we unloaded was some of the store shelf fixtures. And we didn't know what we were unloading. We called this one section L's, which were these brackets that you used for mounting wall shelves on. And then T's, which we later found out were things for holding up the shelves that were just on the open floor. And we unloaded and we unloaded and we unloaded, and there were several trucks like this. Okay, then the merchandise began to arrive, and we put televisions and stereos. Now this was before VCRs were a common thing, so we didn't have any of those. But tires upon tires upon tires upon tires, and the house smelled of new tires. And to this day I get sort of nostalgic smelling the smell of a new tire. But they were everywhere. So for the first several months we lived in this house with the smell of tires, with all sorts of things like TVs and that sort of thing. And my father actually sold a lot of merchandise out of the house before the store was even built. The store opened on October 3rd of 1974. So we're coming up on the anniversary of that, October 3rd of 1974. And when it opened, of course, we were able to move this merchandise out of the house. Well, it's an interesting thing that we moved into the house in Iva before we sold the house in Inman. The house in Inman was up for sale for $60,000. My father had $60,000 in the bank, or my family had $60,000 in the bank. My father had written 2 checks, both for $60,000. Well, just before the checks were due to clear, the house sold, and it closed right away. And so on the day that those 2 checks were both supposed to clear, the money for the close of the house was deposited that same day, which is amazing. Anyway, getting back to the house. Through the first year, my brother and sister and I lived in what had later became the den on army cots. We had these cots that we used to go camping on, and my mother and father slept on their mattress and box springs in what became their room. And we were working on the upstairs part of the house, and I say we, I mean my sister, my mother, my father, and I. And my sister and I were tasked with taking buckets of water, hauling them up the stairs for my mom to mop the floor, and it took a lot of mopping to get all that bee bran and all that nasty up off that floor. Take the dirty water, haul it back outside. And the thing about it is, at this point in time, there is no running water in the house. The house down at the bottom of the hill belonged to the Milfords, Miss Jane and Everett Milford. And I'm not sure if Miss Jane's last name was Milford, but Miss Jane was this sweet lady, and we'll get to that in another video. Anyway, but from their hose in their yard, we fill up the buckets. We take the buckets of water up the hill, into the house, up the stairs. And about the time we get up the stairs, my mother would have a bucket of dirty water for us to haul back out of the house, take down the hill, and dump, and then rinse it out and refill it. And we did that many times. Anyway, later, after all this scrubbing, the house looked beautiful. At least I thought. Okay, at the time my parents bought this house, or we bought this house, in the backyard was an old barn and an old garage, and inside the old barn was an actual manger. And it's not, you know, people think manger and they think, well, this is, you know, a place where babies are laid when they're born, but a manger is a trough for feeding cows and pigs and sheep and that sort of thing. And when we first saw it, my father said, well, this is the manger. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not like the manger we see at church. And in the backyard there was a old house that we ended up calling Raymond's house, because this gentleman lived there, rented it, named Raymond Ashley, and his brother Newt lived there with him. It was a small house, 1 bedroom, like a sitting area, a bathroom, and a kitchen, and that's what was all there was to it. We, after a while, now the house was covered with getting back to the main house, which we renamed from the Gailey place to McClendon Manor. I came up with the name, and my father liked it so well, he had this rubber stamp made up that said Bruce and Merle McClendon, McClendon Manor, the Gailey place in quotation marks, and then corner of West Green and Betsy Street. It had asbestos siding, these asbestos shingles, and they were white. Well, they were supposed to be white. They were sort of this greenish tinge to it. And after about a couple of years, we got out, my mother, my sister, and I, and scrubbed all these white shingles with a mixture of Clorox, Tide, and water to clean these shingles, and then we had to paint them. What color do you paint it? Well, The way this was decided, the house was painted yellow, and the way it was decided the house would be yellow was that somebody had brought some paint back. We sold paint at the store that they didn't like the color, and so that's what color the house was painted. It was because we had this paint, and once it was painted that yellow color, it kind of grew on us. And then all of our rent houses, at one point in time we had a total of 13 rent houses, or 13 houses including that house, including McClendon Manor. There's 13 houses, and the majority of them were painted this yellow color, primarily because it was the color of the house, the McClendon Manor, and I could mix the paint from memory because I'd mixed it so many different times. Back then you had these canisters of colorant that you would have like a recipe that would tell you this many squirts and then this much of another squirt in the thing. And I had the recipe written down on the wall at one point in time there at the store. But later I just had it memorized because I had to mix it so many times, because every year, and I do mean every year, we repainted all the houses. It was just a project. My mother didn't want us to be idle during the summertime, so every year we'd go out and paint the rent houses. Now we might not paint every single rent house every year, but the majority of the rent houses get painted every year. Anyway, that's basically the story of McClendon Manor. Okay, now, here's the interesting part. I believe the house is haunted. And most of the people in my family believe the house was haunted. Now, whether it's a haunt, like an evil haunt or not, I don't think so. I think it's a very good haunt, a good haint, as my father would call it. My family named this haint Press, as in Preston Gailey. What was weird, when we first moved into the house, as we first walked into the house, I had this feeling, this overwhelming feeling, which was like a severe case of deja vu. And it lasted all while we were going through the house. But it was especially strong upstairs. Most of the people that came to the house would not stay upstairs by themselves. My father didn't go upstairs very often. My father was a very spooky kind of person, very, very much afraid of dead people. My Uncle Carl was a very spooky kind of person, very much afraid of things like that. My sister was like, okay, no problem. And I was like, okay, no problem. But my brother just plain wouldn't go upstairs, not most of the time. Very, very rarely would you see him upstairs. Anyway, so we would have, when we first started working on the house, they had these old-time windows that were counterbalanced with these iron weights, and these iron weights were heavy. I mean, very heavy, like maybe 20 pounds. Maybe not that much, but it seemed like 20 pounds. Anyway, if you're not familiar with counterbalance windows, they'll move if you push them, but sometimes they'll move to find an equilibrium, where it balances out. Well, a lot of these windows had been stuck for years, and so when we unstuck them, they would move. Now, a counterbalance window will move to one position and stay there, but these windows would move up and down. Not constantly, but you'd be standing in a room and the window would raise, and then a little bit later it would lower and raise, and it's really weird. We got these windows fixed, and they still did that. When the house was being rewired, when they put new switches up at the top of the stairs, the switches would start flicking on and off, on and off, on and off, and you can actually see the switch flick. Nobody was anywhere near it. There would be times my mother, my mom had arthritis, especially bad in her knees, and so she didn't like to walk the stairs. She wasn't afraid to go upstairs, but she didn't like to walk. Matter of fact, I think she enjoyed the idea that there was a spooky in the house. Anyway, she placed things at the bottom of the stairs, like towels to go upstairs, clothes, that had been washed to go upstairs, toilet paper. And on one occasion, my sister's upstairs, my mama's downstairs. My mom puts the toilet paper at the bottom of the stairs, and she hollers up to my sister. My sister's like, okay, I'll get it. And a little bit later, before my sister gets out of her room, this toilet paper comes flying up to the top of the stairs. Now, my mother's already gone away from the bottom of the stairs. There's nobody else in the house. We don't know what caused that toilet paper to go upstairs, but it did. Spooks, um, freaky gravity, you decide. I'm not going to decide for you. You decide. Okay, but also there would be times when the house would creak. Now, when we first got there, we didn't have any carpet. Remember, we had that hardwood floor, and it would creak in a pattern. It creaked from the top of the stairs into the yellow bedroom where my brother had originally been, into my room, into my sister's room, into the upstairs den, and back to the stairs. When my brother moved out of that room, it wouldn't go to his room. It would go from the top of the stairs to my room, to my sister's room, to the den, and then back to the top of the stairs. Okay, we carpeted, and you couldn't hear it as well, but you could still hear the house creaking. Now, old houses creak. That's given. Okay. There would be times, though, you could feel this presence. Don't know what to call it, just a presence. And like I'd be doing my homework, and I'd feel that presence, and I would start talking to him and say, well, I'm doing my math homework, or I'm doing my English homework, or I'm working on this, or what have you, and just explain whatever it was. In our house, you didn't leave anything out in your room. When you got done, you put it up, you folded your clothes, you put them in your drawers, you hung clothes in the closet. The only place that was allowed to not be perfectly neat was the inside of your closet. You can hang posters in the closet, but you didn't hang up posters on your walls. You didn't hang, just everything had to be neat and orderly. My father had been a training instructor in the Air Force, which is like a drill instructor in the Army. Anyway, he had been one, and everything was neat. And my mother was very neat too. You made your bed. There was no question about what do I do if I don't make my bed, or what happens if I don't make my bed. You made your bed. Every morning your bed was made. Period. End of statement. No questions asked. Okay. So it would be unusual, it did happen, be unusual to misplace anything because you had a place for everything and everything in its place. So say I'm working on my English, and I get up and go to do something, I come back and I can't find my English book. I know it was here on the desk because that's where it belongs, it's on the desk, and it wouldn't be there. And I look and look and look and look and look, and where could it be? And I say, I got to find my English book, and I'd go to do something else because I'd have to do something else. I'd come back, and the English book would be laying in the center of my bed. Now, it hadn't been there before. It had been on my desk. There it was in the center of my bed. And weird things like that would happen. There would be times like I was in the rescue squad, the Iowa Rescue Squad, and I always had to have my keys. And I was paranoid about making sure I kept my keys handy. And for some reason, I couldn't find them. I went to looking for them, and I said out loud, well, I don't know what would happen if the tones went off, and I had to go on a call because I wouldn't be able to get into the rescue squad hut. I wouldn't be able to drive. And just a minute or two later, I walked to go to the bathroom, and a minute or two later, I heard this chink, the sound of keys dropping. And here they were on the middle of the bed. Now, if you drop keys on the bed, they might chink a little, but not like these did. And why would they all of a sudden be on the bed? Now, nobody else was in the house. So, what happened? You decide. Well, we told these stories to a lot of people. My Uncle Carl would stay with us on the weekends. And when my Uncle Carl stayed with us on the weekends, he stayed in what had been my brother's room that we now refer to as the yellow bedroom. So Friday night, he'd come and sleep in the yellow bedroom. Saturday evening, after the store closed, or just before the store closed, he'd drive back home to Atlanta. This was a routine every weekend. Well, at one point in time, I was really into photography, and I had a couple of tripods, just like what this camera is sitting on now, a tripod. And I had bought this old man rubber mask, and this old man rubber mask really looked creepy. Had long hair like I do now, didn't have a beard, and it looked creepy. I took some clothes, some like jeans and a flannel shirt, and stuffed them with some other clothes and some rags and stuff, and laid this on the bed, and I named it Uncle Herman. And I put the rubber mask, stuffed it with some stuff, and laid it on the bed. I took some string fishing line, and string was designed where you could not see it. It was very, very difficult to see. I tied it to these gloves that I put on his hand, ran it through some screw eyes, little round hooks, up through the, screwed them into the ceiling along in a pattern, from over the bed across to the door. So when the door opened, it would make the hand raise up. Uncle Herman's hand would raise up. So I did this early one Friday afternoon, and I went into my room, which was across the hall from the yellow bedroom, to wait to see what happened. And lo and behold, I hear my Uncle Carl, and I go and I crawl down on the floor, and I ease up my door and look out. And Carl opens up the door, and this arm flies up, and Carl goes, and he throws his suitcase, and he beats it to the bottom of the stairs. When he gets down to the bottom of the stairs, he's pulling at the back of his breeches, hollering, "Bruce! Bruce! Bruce!" And he pooped his pants. Well, my father comes out, my mother comes out, and they're trying to figure out what in the world Carl's talking about or screaming about. And I'm up at the top of the stairs just laughing my head off, just laughing to beat the band. And Carl's down there, "Bruce, Bruce." And they asked me what happened. And I told him to come up and showed him Uncle Herman. "Ah, that's funny." Okay. Well, Carl didn't think it was too funny. Well, the next week Carl comes upstairs and he opens the door real careful, like he looks nothing. Okay, so he goes on about his business. The next week, same thing. He comes up, he opens the door, nothing. I don't know how many weeks it was that I did this, but it was several weeks. I took the camera tripod and I put Uncle Herman on where the legs of the tripod, two of the legs of the tripod went into the breeches of Uncle Herman. I strapped it up fairly well with that, and I fixed the hand to where it would fly up. And by that time, I'd found these bloodshot eyes that I could stick into this mask. I taped them into the mask, and so Carl came into the room, and here's bloodshot with the bloodshot glowing kind of eyes. And so I'm waiting across the hall again, and Carl comes up, and by this time he's forgotten to be apprehensive about Uncle Herman. He opens the door, and Uncle Herman's hands flying up, and Carl throwing the suitcase again. This time it doesn't go to the bottom of the stairs, it hits the railing. Carl goes downstairs, his clothes are everywhere. He's screaming and hollering, and he's having a fit. My parents come out, and they just know right away what's happened, and they're laughing. It's just an incredibly funny scene, except for Carl didn't think it was all that funny. Anyway, it was real easy to scare people in the house. People would come to stay the night, and they would swear that they saw stuff, and maybe they did, and maybe they didn't. I couldn't tell you. I just wanted to share this with everyone, especially my nieces and nephews that lived in the house, or my one nephew. Sorry, I don't know. Okay, one nephew and then two nieces. Anyway, lived in the house. I'm sure that you may have heard things, you may have, rumors, or you may have noticed things or felt presence. And if so, I'd love for you to give me a email, Gindy's Videos, GINDYSVIDEOS @gmail.com. Anybody else that's interested, shoot me an email, do so. Again, Gindy's Video, GINDYSVIDEOS @gmail.com. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in other posts. This is a Federal Trade Commission required notice. When you click on an advertisement that is displayed with this video, or just before it, we receive a small commission. Sometimes, if you merely watch an ad, we receive commission. If you purchase anything by clicking on links on any of our websites, we receive a commission as well. These great redneck coffee mugs are available at www.cafepress.com/redneck4president. We receive a commission off of them as well. You can also purchase buttons, yard signs, etc. from that website.